1, 2. Hi everybody, welcome to Amnesty International. Thank you very much for coming. Just a couple of things before we start with this press conference to launch our kitchen area and over to your left. And the nearest fire exit, we're not expecting a fire drill today, so if you do hear a fire alarm, please exit by the nearest doors and fire exits directly outside this room. I'm going to hand over now to Amnesty International Secretary Kumi Naidu.
Thank you very much. Folks, welcome to this launch of a new report called Blood-Soaked Secrets, Why Iran's 1988 Prison Massacres Are an Ongoing Crime Against Humanity. Thank you all for your attendance here today. Iranian authorities are committing crimes against humanity to this day by concealing the fate of thousands of political dissidents who were massacred in prison in 1988. The 1988 massacre of thousands of political dissidents is one of the most heinous chapters in terms of state violence in Iran's history and in the history of most countries around the world. For 30 years, the authorities have led a sinister campaign to hide the truth about what happened to at least 5,000 political dissidents in prisons across Iran who were forcibly disappeared and then cruelly slaughtered in a widespread and systematic attack amounting to crimes against humanity. All along the way, distorting and denying the facts. This comprehensive report that we launch here today delves into Amnesty's own documentation of the 1988 massacres from the organization's historical archives and builds upon the painstaking work undertaken by partner organizations, survivors, and victims' families over the past 3 decades. I would just pause here to say that for family members who are on the receiving end of disappearance, it is one of the most horrendous things for any family member to have to deal with. A few weeks ago, I was in Peru and was with mothers of people who disappeared in similar circumstances, and the period in mass graves and so on. And 30 years later, the grief, the sorrow, the pain, the horror of the loss, and the absence of closure is just very, very moving, and what's happening in Iran is so different. But this is not purely a historical report. The repercussions of these abhorrent crimes continue to this day. Prominent officials with direct links to the killings in what was called death squads continue to hold positions of power in Iran today, including in the judiciary and government. Families of victims continue to suffer, tormented by the lack of truth and justice for their loved ones, unable to bury or properly mourn the dead. Mass grave sites, which would have been an option for people to be able to at least bring closure to the loss of families, have been either bulldozed, built over, and destroyed. And those who have been seeking, family members, survivors, as well as victim support organizations that have been demanding answers, have faced relentless harassment, intimidation, and attacks from the authorities. The lack of accountabilities for these crimes against humanity also has had long-lasting consequences, creating a crisis of impunity. Iran's leaders today feel they can brazenly commit human rights violations without ever facing any consequences. Sadly, they are not alone in this category. Today, hundreds of human rights defenders, lawyers, activists, and minorities are regularly harassed, interrogated, arbitrarily arrested, and detained. Many are languishing in jail. More recently, since information about the killings has come to light, Iran's leaders have openly celebrated the mass killings, making grotesque statements, hailing those involved in these mass murders as heroes, and so on. Holding people to account to such serious crimes is important beyond just Iran, in all countries and for all humanity, and to ensure such horrific events are never repeated again. The urgency to address crimes against humanity does not lessen with time. In fact, it becomes even more crucial. One of the most simple things that ordinary people understand, you don't have to be a legal expert or a highly educated person, but it's just the simple phrase, justice delayed is justice denied. And for the families of the 5,000 plus people that disappeared, justice has certainly been delayed and denied to them. This is why Amnesty International is calling for an independent investigation led by the United Nations to help bring those responsible for these crimes to justice. The consequences of impunity have been seen this year and in previous years in the MENA region and beyond. I just want to conclude with just pointing out that the names of the people that were involved in these death squads are known, and we will speak to them later should you want that details. I just want to conclude by just highlighting a few ripple effects of people accepting the status quo and allowing the Iranian government to get away with murder. So we've had in Saudi Arabia, for example, the fact that senior officials there felt they could get away with the kind of horrific murder of Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi is one example. The fact that in Raqqa, in Syria, the United States bombing killed many civilians in the hundreds, and they were in denial for a long time. And up to now, even though they've now written to Amnesty conceding 77 civilian deaths, the number is much higher. They're not talking about any support, compensation for families of survivors and so on. The list is much longer. We can talk about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Myanmar, and so on. So essentially, what we have is a culture of impunity that must be challenged, and every place we refuse, we fail to hold governments accountable for this level of human rights violations, we are opening up ourselves to allowing a pattern to develop. So lastly, I want to just draw your attention in conclusion to, if you looked at some of these posters around the wall, you would find one where one of the political figures in Iran was accusing Amnesty International of being agents of external forces. So I just want to say we are a very equal opportunity human rights organization. So I would just invite the Iranian government as we launch this report to just go and look at our website, to look at all the reports that we have released, and they will find that we are just as hard on the United States, we are just as hard on Russia, we are just as hard on Syria, and we are completely fair and transparent in our criticism. So thank you very much. And now we'll just show you a short video to give you a sense of the issue before I introduce my colleagues to speak to you. Thank you.
هنوزم که هنوز پیدا نشده مشاهد هنوز زنده است مادر پدر انسان منم میگفتم بلکه امیدوارم اینجوری باشه.
In late July 1988, several thousand political activists held in prisons across Iran suddenly disappeared. These were mostly young men and women in some cases just teenagers when they're arrested, who've been unjustly tried and imprisoned years earlier simply for their political opinions and peaceful activities such as distributing opposition leaflets and attending demonstrations. Their families then spent months desperately searching for information about their loved ones. After months of being lied to by the authorities, they began to learn the devastating truth. The authorities had executed their relatives in secret and had dumped their bodies at night, mostly in unmarked mass graves.
خیلی از این موضوعی که بچه‌ها رفته بودن خیلی تو استرس بودن دیگه حالت خشمگین داشتم نسبت بهش خیلی چیز می‌شدم میگفتم همسرم چی شده و بچه‌ها چی شدن که برگشت گفت که چه اعدام و اینجوری واسه دستش رو اینجوری کرد گفت اعدامش کردیم
به همونجا اصلا من میگم فلج شده بودم و هیچ حرکتی نمیتونستم بکنم. یعنی فکر کردم تمام این دنیا رو سرم خراب شد. فکر کردم که دیگه اون کسی رو که من همیشه عاشقانه دوست داشتم و هنوز هم دارم تموم شد و همین راحتی کشتنش اعدامش کرد.
البته هیچ وقت رسما اینو اعلام نکردم. من چون اون موقع آزاد بودم خودم دنبال میکردم طریق خانواده ها، نه جسد به کسی تحویل دادن نه خبری دادن.
In 2016, an audio file of a secret meeting that was held at the height of the mass killings was leaked. In the recording, some of the key officials responsible for the mass killings can be heard discussing the operation in hair-raising details. Three decades on, they, along with other perpetrators, remain in high positions of power and have faced no accountability for their crimes. The secrecy surrounding how the victims were killed and where they were buried means that they are still forcibly disappeared. The torture of their families is ongoing. These crimes are so serious that they constitute crimes against humanity. Amnesty International is calling for UN investigations. The Iranian authorities relentlessly seek to hide the truth from the world. With your help, we are determined to stop them. The perpetrators must face accountability. Families and survivors have the right to truth and justice.
میخوام قبر بچه‌ام پیدا کنم. میخوام ببینم گور بچه‌ام کجا هستن. که یه روز یک از زنده موندم رفتم ایران. برم خودم بنازم رو قبر بچه‌ام. برم بر بچه‌ام گریه کنم. برم سینه خودم بنازم رو قبر بچه‌ام.
Thank you very much. I now hand over to the lead author of this report, Rahani, who is a senior researcher in Iran.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I am going to unpack the legal arguments that we are making in this report about why Iran continues to commit crimes against humanity today. The extrajudicial killings that took place 30 years ago did amount to crimes against humanity. The legal conclusion that we have made in this report is that given the ongoing concealment of the fate of the victims and the whereabouts of their remains, in addition to extrajudicial execution, murder, extermination of political dissidents, the authorities have also committed the crime of enforced disappearance under international law. Just to give a very brief definition of this crime, when a state commits extrajudicial execution in detention and after that it refuses to acknowledge the killings or reveal the fate of the victims and the whereabouts of their remains, it has committed the crime of enforced disappearance. Enforced disappearances are ongoing crimes. It means that they continue until the state reveals the fate of the victim, which includes the causes and circumstances of the killings, and return the remains of the victims to their families. None of this has happened in the case of these horrendous crimes in the country for the past 30 years. Just to go back to how these killings started exactly 30 years ago, in July 1988, thousands of political dissidents held in prisons across Iran suddenly went missing. For months, nothing was heard. From October 1980 onwards, the authorities started to inform many families verbally that their loved ones had been killed. However, they provided no information about why their loved ones were killed, how they were killed, and where the bodies are buried. In fact, in some cases, they did not even tell families that their loved ones were dead. Families learned sometimes months or years later from former prisoners or informal government contacts that their loved ones had been killed. At best, when informing the families, the authorities about the execution of their loved ones, they returned to them bags that the authorities claimed contained the belongings of their loved ones. In some cities, even these last mementos were not returned. We have talked to family members who remain in disbelief after 30 years that their loved ones are executed, especially elderly mothers. They have told us that their loved ones remain for them somewhere between life and death, and there is this burning sense for truth and justice. As part of concealing the fate and whereabouts of the victims, we have also looked at death certificates, which falsely record the cause of death. Some of them are displayed on the walls in this room, and as you will see, the authorities have cited natural causes or simply no cause for the executions that they have carried out. As a result, given the ongoing uncertainty around the fate of the victims, the authorities' refusal to return the bodies, we have said that they have committed enforced disappearances under international law. As these have been systematic and widespread across the country, they amount also to crimes against humanity. And as I mentioned earlier, this is in addition to the crime of murder, extermination, torture, and persecution that they have committed. I'd just like to briefly touch also on the situation of mass graves, which relates to the concealment of the whereabouts of the remains. In no cases that we are aware of, the authorities have returned the bodies of the victims to their families. In the majority of cases, they have not even revealed the location of burial. For a small number of families in a number of cities in the country, they identified a few individual graves where the authorities claim the victims are buried. Many families remain concerned that they have been deceived and these individual graves may be empty. There is a lot more to be said on this, but I won't unpack it here. The majority of the families remain either in the dark or have identified through informal local contacts or government contacts and through their desperate searches suspected or known mass graves around the country. We have looked at 18 mass grave sites in detail, but the number of them are much higher and they are scattered across the country. To this day, the authorities have not acknowledged even one of these mass grave sites. On the contrary, they are destroying these mass grave sites by bulldozing them. They prevent families from gathering at them to hold commemorative gatherings. And given this situation, clearly the exhumation of the mass graves and the identification of the remains by DNA analysis seems far out of reach at the moment. Just to mention a final point about the concealment of the burial, we have also looked at the official online burial records, and in 1999 we have searched the name of 4,672 victims in official online burial records, and 99% of the name of the victims are missing from these burial records. And as for the remaining 1%, we have just not been able to conclude with certainty that the names that resemble may belong to the victims. Given this staggering exclusion of the name of victims from burial records, it is very concerning that the authorities have also manipulated burial records to conceal the scale of their killings and the memory of the victims.
Thank you, Naha. Before I hand to the last speaker, I just want to note for those of you who are thinking, it's 30 years is such a long time, can't justice be achieved and so on. And I will just draw your attention to the fact that just a few weeks ago, finally the tribunal in the Khmer Rouge case in Cambodia, decades later, delivered a verdict. So just to say that there's a precedent for not giving up and for continuing to seek justice. So it's my pleasure now to hand you over to my colleague Philip Luther, who's very, very famous. You've just seen in 10 minutes on the video. Over to you.
Thank you. So, just to complement and complete our little presentation here, I wanted to give a sense of why we've done this report and what we've tried to do with it. I mean, Rahman's just talked about the denials, the distortion of truth. This report is an attempt to cut through those denials and prise open what are already cracks in the wall of secrecy that the Iranian authorities have erected. Now, it's really important to say here that we were not starting from scratch. We've been very lucky to build on work that many others have done over the last 3 decades and have received huge support for this particular project. We acknowledge this in writing in the report, but let me just say here that we were indebted, broadly speaking, to the families of victims, to the survivors of the death commissions back in '88, both in Iran and in exile, who have written their memoirs and sought to keep alive the memory of these terrible events. Some specific organizations, we're also then indebted to the Abdurrahman Buraman Center, who have a fantastic database, the Omid Memorial, recording executions since the 80s. To Iran, a group that has published a vast body of literature on the gross human rights violations of the 1980s. But special thanks to Justice for Iran, because they generously shared their time, expertise, and resources. They provided us with testimonies, photographs, video materials, and really helped us to reach a far wider pool of witnesses than we would have otherwise been, and build up a more geographically diverse picture of the violations in Iran. The report seeks to complement all of that, build on that, and just to pick on one aspect of it, it seeks to try and give a picture of how the process leading to the executions actually functioned. These so-called conducted interviews with survivors of the mass killings, that's to say people who appeared before the death commissions but were then not executed. To give you a sense, we spoke to 41 survivors from 16 cities in Iran about this matter. To give you a sense of the breakdown of that, 21 were affiliated to the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, 17 were affiliated to different leftist groups active at the time, 3 to Kurdish opposition groups. Testimonies appear in detail in the report. But the picture that emerges is of a process for selecting those to be executed that was both summary and cruel. Give you a sense, those who appeared before the death commissions were asked if they were prepared to express repentance for their past political beliefs and activities and denounce their political groups in writing. But some questions were even more shocking than that. I'll give you just two. The question, are you willing to participate in firing squads? Was one of the questions. Are you willing to hang a member of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran? Another. And many prisoners did not realize that the answers they were going to give to these questions would mean the difference between life or death. Some survivors also described to us the acts of provocation of an extreme kind in which they were made either to watch executions or were confronted with the executed bodies of relatives or fellow prisoners. Kumi has already talked about how all of this is relevant to today. And as I'm talking about death commissions, it's important to say, and this is what's one of the points we highlight in the report, that many of the officials who participated in those death commissions have held, and in some cases continue to hold, positions of power in Iran today, in the judiciary, in the government. Just to name three, we have more in the report. Ali Raza Avai, current Justice Minister, was Prosecutor General of Dezful in Khuzestan province and was tasked with participating in the death commission in that city. Justice Minister. His predecessor, Mustafa Kur Mohammadi, who served as Justice Minister between 2013 and 2017, represented the Ministry of Intelligence in the Tehran Death Commission. Ibrahim Raisi, another member of the Tehran Death Commission, was the country's chief prosecutor until 2016. It's difficult to overstate the degree to which this brazen lack of accountability has contaminated judicial institutions and led to the crisis of impunity we're seeing today. To finish, the report sets out quite a number of recommendations. Some of them are to the Iranian authorities, but as we've said, the problem is that in the short term, there is little prospect for truth, justice, and reparations emanating from any initiative that they do at the current time. And that's why we're asking then for the UN and the international community, who for a long time failed the victims of these massacres, of these continuing forced disappearances, to make amends. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So folks, we have to take questions from you. Please identify yourself, your name, and which organization you're representing. The floor is open.
Thank you for your report. My name is Georg Cole from BBC. I'm wondering how you think, obviously today you requested the United Nations to set up a committee to investigate crime against humanity. We know in the past 4 decades, Iranian regime pretty much defiant against any verdict from international community and rights group. How optimistic you are that you would listen to you and even Iranian regime cooperate with you?
It's always a tough question when we're looking at what likelihood is there of success. And there are various routes to such a mechanism, such a commission of inquiry being set up. The UN Human Rights Council could order a commission of inquiry an independent impartial commission of inquiry. The General Assembly of the United Nations could set up a mechanism to investigate such crimes. Now, that has been done. There are numerous examples of the Human Rights Council setting up probes, inquiries into gross human rights violations that may constitute crimes against humanity. There's obviously examples in recent times in Syria. You have also the UN General Assembly setting up a mechanism because the Security Council was failing on Syria, a mechanism that could one day bring justice to those who've been afflicted by crimes against humanity and war crimes there. And the importance of that, we think, is not only the truth, but also it's because even though 30 years have passed since the crimes, and as we've stressed, these crimes are continuing, there is evidence that needs to be collected and preserved now. And in a way, therefore, time is running out, and that's why, even though the original crimes happened 30 years ago, there's a certain urgency to this. The hope is that, and we're acknowledging that to see the final stages of this battle, one needs to keep in mind a longer-term goal. And there are many countries around the world where justice and truth have looked impossible for many years, for decades even. And at some point, circumstances have changed, and it has been possible to have a transitional justice process. It's been possible to have a process where justice and truth then emerges. And that is what we are aiming for with the recommendations in this report.
Okay. And just to add two things. I mean, obviously your question suggests that it's a steep mountain to climb, and we don't disagree with that. But just to say that the two options, just to pick up on the Human Rights Commission route, the current Human Rights Commission and I started work, our jobs pretty close to each other, and we visited together in Geneva last month. She will be one of the people who will receive this report with an appeal to her to act with urgency. And we will, as we did with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, will make a direct request to the UN Secretary General as well to intervene.
In addition to the UN political bodies that my colleagues mentioned, we are also planning to engage the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, as this committee this working group has already accepted the cases of a number of family members who lost their loved ones during the mass executions, and we believe that for every single extrajudicial execution that was carried out in 1988, a complaint can be submitted to the working group on enforced disappearances. Of course, the numbers are massive, so we are still examining what would be the best way to raise as many cases as possible with the working group. It's important to mention here that Iran has not acknowledged even one single execution that was carried out in 1988 to international bodies. We have displayed on the walls in this room some of the answers that they gave to the UN in 1988 and in the following years. Either they did not comment, or when they commented, they claimed that the victims were non-existent, individuals, or they claimed that they were alive, studying at universities, working in Iran, had escaped abroad, achieved martyrdom in Iraq, were prisoners of war in Iraq, or were released from prison. So this is the situation, and we believe that the UN has grossly failed the victims and their families, but not by accepting these deliberately false replies and not following up on the fate and whereabouts of the victims, and we plan to basically revive these cases.
Anybody else? Please.
Hi, Natasha Schmidt from IranWire.com. As far as I understand, understand the 2016 clip that was released by the office of Ayatollah Montazeri. Going forward, what role do you, if any, do you think that office could play in bringing justice to these families? Does the office have justice as part of its plan, or is it simply just trying to sort of recover the reputation of Montazeri? Is that their agenda?
It is not for us to anticipate about their intentions. What is important is that archives and documents related to the mass killings of 1988 must be publicly disclosed, and the truth about the number of those killed and the circumstances and causes of the deaths must be revealed. We therefore welcome the disclosure of the audio recording and urge the Office of Montazeri and all other former and current officials who have information about these matters to come clean and explain why they did these killings, how they carried them out, and where the bodies remain. We have discussed in the report the issue, but also from the government, former foreign ministers and former deputy foreign ministers, former prime minister in 1988, who blatantly denied the mass killings. Then some of their quotes are again displayed on these walls. We discovered these quotes from AI archives and from UN documents from the time. And they have been complicit in concealing the crimes. So we are not just talking about members of the Death Commission and high-level judicial officials. We are talking about an entire diplomatic system that was involved in covering up the mass killings in their interactions with the UN. Considering the replies that they have given to the UN at the time, they must have information about these mass killings. For example, former Prime Minister Mousavi, former Minister of Foreign Affairs Abdullah Nouri, representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the UN, such as Jafar Mahallati and Cyrus Nasiri. These are individuals who have had information. They have been involved in concealing the crimes, and as part of our recommendations to the UN, we have called on all individuals who have been involved in committing the crimes and concealing the crimes to be investigated.
The timing of publishing this report, why now?
I think Kumi had an earlier quote that as time passes by, the urgency for dealing with crimes against humanity increases rather than lessens. In this case, why now is by the fact that not only the urgency remains, but the crimes are happening now. That's the answer.
Our colleague's earlier question about the recordings. Also, the recordings do change the narrative, because if you look at it, it was denial, 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 denial. Then the recording comes out, and then the state actually steps forward to almost defend the actions and to actually declare the people who led it as heroes and acting in the interest of the state. So that being a relatively newer development, I think does change the dynamic about possibility to your first question, slightly more in a positive direction, given that now it's not a question of us having to establish the basic fact that mass executions took place, that mass disappearance took place, because they are now acknowledging it, at least in part. At least in part. Please.
Hi, Alex MacDonald from Middle East Eye. I was just wondering, as part of the investigation, part of sort of collating evidence for this, was there any discussion with any of the groups involved, like the Mujahideen or the Two-Day Party or any of the other groups? Were they involved in any of the kind of process of collating information?
We have relied on different research methods. One of the main methods was collecting testimonies from all the relevant sources. They included family members, survivors, former prisoners, meaning those who were in prison up to July 1988, but not at the time of the mass killings, as well as other witnesses. We tried to be proportionate in terms of the bodies, in terms of the interviewees that we approached. So we have interviewed both leftist prisoners or prisoners who had affiliations, former prisoners who had affiliations with leftist groups, and prisoners who had former or current affiliations with the PMOI, as the PMOI lost the PMOI victims were the majority of the victims in the country. We have also compared and consolidated lists of execution victims prepared by different groups. They include the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, as well as independent human rights groups, such as the human rights group based in Sweden, as well as the Abdurrahman Ruman Center that my colleague Phil mentioned earlier. We have examined satellite imageries in order to trace the timeline of destruction with the close support that we receive from Justice for Iran, that has done extensive research on this topic for several years. And we collected death certificates in order to examine the concealment of the fate and whereabouts of the victims. And we have also looked at official online burial registers. So in that part, it was very helpful to compare the list of victims prepared by different organizations with these official online burial registers to see the manipulation of burial records.
Thank you. Any further questions? Going.
Sorry, can I ask another? I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have so many questions. I think in the era of Trump, obviously it's difficult for a lot of human rights groups to operate, as you know, possibly supporting bin Salman fervently. But in the other hand, do you think in any way now Trump is at odds with the Iranian regime? It might be time they might influence Security Council to do something about this issue. Have you ever examined this avenue? Have you been in contact with these people, his administration, to do something about this?
To anticipate how president...
Anticipate or put pressure actually on Iran, or I don't know, Security Council, all those UN bodies actually to investigate. This is exactly what you want, and possibly, as irony, I know, but at the same time for you to approach them and
So let me start the response and then I just want to read. So firstly, I think it's a very hazardous activity to try to predict how Donald Trump and his administration will act on anything. So obviously there is a strong tension driven in the not in the most helpful ways anyway by the United States. So so obviously we're noting the fluid political moment that we are seeing. Secondly, as is normally the case, when we are, as Amnesty International, advocating for a particular cause, issue, community, and so on, we seek to mobilize allies across the spectrum, irrespective of political ideology, political party, and so on. So in that sense, obviously, we are not close to the idea, if there is a window of opportunity, to actually pursue that. I'll just give you an example. With regard to the situation with the Rohingya in Myanmar, there we were able not to work by the White House specifically, but with Nikki Haley at the UN, we were able to lobby, provide high-quality research documents to her and so on. And to a large extent, on the Rohingya issue, we were able to get the US government, notwithstanding Donald Trump, to actually be on the right side of the history of that question. So the question is, would we not talk to Trump? Of course not. We will talk to him. If there's an opportunity to advance justice for the Iranian people that have been impacted by this horrific, heinous crime 30 years ago, we certainly would pursue it. sounds like you are questioned out. Okay, so just to end, I would like to end with a very personal appeal to those who have power to do the right thing here. And the people that I question are those, certainly I want to make a particular appeal to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to read this report, to consider action on it, and to recognize that people have been waiting for very long. To those in Iran itself, and that optimistic question of whether maybe somebody in the Iranian state released that recording because they wanted justice, let's hope so. I'm sure there are people who have tortured feelings, especially if they were involved or aware of it. So again, we would say to the Iranian government in particular, you have an opportunity here to undo a terrible, terrible wrong, and we urge you to search in your conscience to actually offer justice to the families that have been waiting. So I'll just end with this simple thing to all those who have the power to do the right thing by the families of those that have been suffering under enforced disappearances for 30 years. Just think that it's your mother, that it's your father, it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your husband, it's your wife, it's your child. And ask yourself, would you want to die without knowing what happened to them? Most of these families have accepted that their family members are not with us anymore. They just want the right, the dignity to able to say goodbye within their spiritual and religious traditions, which is their right, and we hope that a sense of humanity so many decades later will prevail, so that those that have been struggling for 3 decades to get justice for their families and themselves will eventually get it. As far as Amnesty is concerned, we will continue to maintain our efforts here, notwithstanding, and as Rawa said, the fact that 3 decades is gone is not a discouragement to us. It is a further encouragement that we've got to stay in the fight. And if in the end there is a failure to deliver to the people, history must record that there were lots of organizations, including the Iranian human rights organizations, who function under difficult circumstances, that have did everything in their power. And the negative reading on history will not be on the human rights groups that fought for justice. It will be on the Iranian regime for failing to act. So thank you everybody for coming. We really appreciate your time. For those of you who are staying behind for individual interviews with my colleagues here, you're very welcome for that. I'll just offer some tea and be very generously provided biscuits. Don't be shy about biscuits. And have a good day and a good week. Thank you.